Yes, I was I'm a field geologist. In my first jobs were in Trinidad and Colombia, and when I'd been there 6 years, and they asked me to write up a report on the assessment of Colombia. And this was really quite a turning point for me, because I looked at lots of different geological provinces. Some were good, some were bad, some were big, some were small. So I kind of built a view of this to see just what the limits were. And this was really the first time that the limits became evident. Anyway, then later in 1969, I was with Amoco in Chicago, now part of a team looking at the world. And it soon became evident that every country had this kind of limit, this sort of relationship between the amount of wells drilled, what they found, and you got a feeling for the limits of each place. Later I went on and I became a manager, and I was running an oil company in Norway. And in Norway, one of the things the companies were expected to do was to sponsor research. So one of the projects I sponsored with the government was indeed a study of peak oil. And then after the Second World War, there was a great surge of consumption, exploration, development, everything. So the production of oil just increased radically. But each barrel produced meant there's one less left. So gradually we reached the top when the supply limits begin to manifest themselves and production begins to fall. I always find this the same. When people actually get into this study, it's not a as every beer drinker knows, the glass starts full and ends empty. And the quicker you drink it, the quicker it's gone. It's really nothing very scientific about all of this. It's quite simple, really. But it's not a very welcome message, because people always hope that they'll find more and bigger and better things coming. Anyway, my best assessment is that the peak of conventional oil, that's the cheap, easy stuff that matters most, has been passed in 2005. We face this turning point between 50 years of expansion, and now we're not running out of oil, I should stress that. What we are facing is a gentle slope. It's only declining at about 3% a year, nothing too outrageous, but there's a huge difference between going up and coming down. So this is an economic event of more or less unparalleled magnitude, because we've never really run out of anything as critical as oil has become before. Well, people will have to become more local, is what it boils down to. We won't have food transported all the way around the world. We'll have local markets. This transition town movement is really the way to go. And it also started here in Kinsale. I was asked to give a lecture in Germany at a university there, around 2000. And at the end of this lecture, the German government, in fact, sent a busload of people to attend this lecture, and I met them over some beers afterwards. And I said, well, it's silly, this is just one old man in Ballydehob. Shouldn't we form some sort of organization to progress this work? And so this began, and then there were various scientists and academics and government officials around the place, and I started putting out a little newsletter, simply sent out as an attachment to an email, and needed a name for this thing, so I called it the Association for the Study of Peak Oil. Nice abbreviation, ASPO or ASPO. And after that, a little committee was formed, and then we had subsequent annual conferences in Paris, in Berlin, in Lisbon, in Pisa, and Cork.
I remember
a couple of years ago in Cork, which was one of the best, I have to say. And then there was one in Barcelona, and there's just recently been one in Denver. And this newsletter that got put on websites and so on, and eventually was read by hundreds of thousands of people. But I've now, after the 100th edition, I said, well, enough is enough, and I've retired from writing the thing. But there's now some 36 ASPO organizations in different countries around the world, everywhere from China to Australia and so on. So this thing that has just grown enormously over the last few years. And I think now the governments and the official organizations, they're certainly aware of peak oil now. Whether they like to accept it or whether they say, oh, it's coming in a few years' time, is just surrounded by politics. But there's a huge change in that regard. Well, thank you. Absolutely. It's extremely good of you, and I certainly appreciate your interest in this fine presentation that you're making. Is extremely kind of you.